Some people say that the bond between a mother and daughter is unbreakable. They say it's forged in blood, sealed by years of shared tears and laughter, and strengthened by an invisible thread that connects two hearts across any distance. I used to believe that with every fiber of my being. I used to think that no matter what happened in this world, no matter how dark things got, my mother would always be in my corner. I thought she would always choose me. I was wrong. The day I realized my mother chose my enemy over me was the day something inside me shattered into pieces so small I'm still finding fragments of it in the corners of my heart. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a complete demolition of everything I thought I knew about family, about loyalty, and about the woman who brought me into this world. And what made it worse, what made it absolutely unbearable, was that she chose the one person who had spent years trying to destroy me. She chose Claire Whitmore. My name is Sophie Harrison, and this is the story of how my own mother betrayed me in the worst possible way, and how I clawed my way back from the ashes of that betrayal to make sure the truth was finally revealed. This is my confession, my journey through the darkness, and my path to the justice I fought so hard to achieve. I need to take you back to the beginning, to a time when life seemed simpler, even though it wasn't. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts called Millbrook, about 40 minutes outside of Boston. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were currency, and where your last name determined your place in the social hierarchy. My mother, Margaret, had grown up poor in that town. Her family lived in a small house on the wrong side of the tracks, and she spent her childhood watching the wealthy families drive by in their expensive cars, dreaming of a different life. My father, Thomas Harrison, was a kind man who worked as an electrician. He loved my mother deeply, but he could never give her the lifestyle she craved. I remember being about 7 years old, watching my parents argue in the kitchen late at night. My father would say something about being grateful for what they had, and my mother would respond with bitter silence, her eyes fixed on the window as if she were looking at a world she could never reach. When I was 9, my father died in a work accident. An electrical fire at a construction site took him away from us in an instant. I remember the phone call, the way my mother's face crumbled, and the months of grief that followed. But even then, even in my childhood innocence, I noticed something unsettling. My mother's grief seemed to mix with something else, something that looked almost like calculation. Within a year of my father's death, she had started dating again, and her targets were very specific. She was looking for money. Richard Whitmore entered our lives when I was 11. He was a successful businessman who owned several commercial properties in the Boston area. He was also recently divorced and had a daughter from his first marriage named Claire. Claire was 2 years older than me, and from the moment we met, I knew there was something wrong with her. I still remember that first meeting like it was yesterday. Richard had invited us to his house for dinner, a sprawling colonial mansion that made my mother's eyes light up with barely concealed desire. Claire came down the stairs wearing a white dress, her blonde hair perfectly curled, and she smiled at my mother with such sweetness that it was almost believable. But when her eyes landed on me, something changed. It was subtle, just a flicker, but I saw it. There was calculation in those blue eyes, a cold assessment that didn't belong on a 13-year-old's face. That night, while the adults talked in the living room, Claire took me upstairs to show me her room. She had everything a girl could want: dolls, books, a television of her own. But as soon as we were alone, her mask slipped. "Your mom is trying to marry my dad," she said, her voice flat and cold. "I know what she is. She's a gold digger." I was only 11, but I knew what that meant, and even though part of me recognized the uncomfortable truth in her words, my loyalty to my mother flared up. "That's not true," I said. "She loves him." Claire laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "Sure she does, and you're just here because she needs a prop. The poor widow with the sad little daughter. It's pathetic." That was the moment I realized Claire Whitmore would never accept me. Not because of anything I had done, but because my mother's presence in her father's life threatened her perfect world. And from that day forward, she dedicated herself to making my life miserable. My mother and Richard got married when I was 12. We moved into that colonial mansion, and overnight, my world changed. We had money now, nice things, a social standing that my mother had always craved. But for me, it was a nightmare. Claire was relentless. She would steal my things and hide them, then watch with innocent eyes as I was blamed for losing them. She would whisper lies about me to her friends, and soon I was ostracized at school. She once put something in my shampoo that made my hair turn an odd shade of green, and when I cried, she told her father I was being dramatic. The worst part was that my mother never defended me. She was so focused on keeping Richard happy, so terrified of losing her new lifestyle, that she would dismiss my complaints with a wave of her hand. "Claire is just adjusting," she would say. "Give her time." Or worse, "Stop being so sensitive, Sophie. You need to try harder to get along with her." I tried. God knows I tried. I swallowed my pride, I ignored the cruelty, and I did everything I could to make peace with my stepsister. But Claire didn't want peace. She wanted me gone. When I was 15, things escalated in a way that changed everything. I had finally made a friend at school, a girl named Nina Castillo who had moved to Millbrook from Texas. Nina was different from the other kids. She didn't care about social status or who your parents were. She saw me, really saw me, and she became my lifeline during those dark years. Claire noticed our friendship, and it infuriated her. She couldn't stand that I had found happiness despite her efforts, so she did something unforgivable. She spread a rumor that I had been caught shoplifting at the local mall. She even went so far as to plant stolen items in my backpack, which were discovered by a teacher during a random locker check. The humiliation was devastating. Even though the charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, the damage was done. My reputation was destroyed, and everywhere I went, people whispered about me. My mother's reaction was the worst part. She was more concerned about what people would think of her than about my pain. "How could you do this to us?" she hissed at me that night. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Richard's business partners are talking about this. His daughter's stepsister, a thief. This could ruin everything." "I didn't do it," I sobbed. "Claire set me up. She planted those things in my bag." My mother's face hardened. "That's enough. I won't have you blaming Claire for your mistakes. She's Richard's daughter, and you need to respect that." That was the first time I truly understood where I stood in my mother's hierarchy of priorities. I wasn't first. I wasn't even second. I was somewhere far down the list, beneath Richard's money, beneath the lifestyle, beneath Claire's approval, and it broke something inside me. I survived high school by keeping my head down and counting the days until I could escape. Nina remained my loyal friend, the only person who believed me when I said Claire was behind everything. Together, we documented every cruel thing she did, keeping a journal that would one day become the foundation of everything. When I turned 18, I left Millbrook with a scholarship to a state university and never looked back. I worked multiple jobs to support myself because I refused to take money from Richard or my mother. I wanted to build a life that was entirely my own, untainted by their influence. And slowly, painfully, I did exactly that. I studied business and marketing, driven by a need to prove that I could succeed without the advantages Claire had been given. I graduated near the top of my class, landed a job at a marketing firm in Boston, and worked my way up with relentless determination. By the time I was 30, I was a senior marketing director at one of the most respected firms in the city. I had my own apartment, my own money, and my own life. I had rebuilt myself from the broken girl who had been discarded by her own mother. During those years, I kept my distance from my family. I would visit for major holidays, putting on a polite facade for a few hours before escaping back to my real life. My relationship with my mother was cordial but hollow. We would exchange pleasantries, But there was always a wall between us. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. Claire, meanwhile, had failed at almost everything she touched. Despite all her advantages, she couldn't hold down a job. She went through relationships like tissues, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty promises. She had tried to start several businesses, all of which had failed spectacularly, funded by her father's seemingly endless patience and checkbook. By the time we were both in our 30s, she was living back home with Richard and my mother, bitter and resentful of the world that had refused to hand her success on a silver platter. I would be lying if I said her failures didn't bring me a small measure of satisfaction, but I never gloated. I never rubbed it in. I had moved on, or so I thought. Everything changed 2 years ago on the day of my grandmother's funeral. My mother's mother, Eleanor, had passed away at the age of 83. Despite her difficult relationship with my mother, Eleanor had always been kind to me. She was the one person in my family who had truly seen what Claire was, and she had warned me more than once to be careful. "That girl has darkness in her," Eleanor had told me once when I was 16. "And your mother is too blinded by money to see it. You protect yourself, Sophie. You build your own life and don't let either of them take it from you." I had followed her advice, and when she died, I felt the loss deeply. I flew back to Millbrook for the funeral, prepared for a brief, uncomfortable visit. I had no idea that this trip would set in motion the events that would ultimately lead to my mother's betrayal and my own fight for justice. The funeral was held at the small church in town, followed by a reception at the community center. I arrived alone, dressed in black, and was immediately struck by how little had changed. The same faces, the same whispered conversations, the same social dynamics I had escaped years ago. My mother greeted me with a stiff embrace, and Richard nodded at me with his usual detached politeness. Claire was there too, of course, and she looked terrible. Her face was puffy, her eyes bloodshot, and there was a desperation about her that I hadn't seen before. "Sophie," she said, approaching me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's been so long. You look well." I knew better than to trust that smile. "Thank you, Claire. I'm sorry for your loss." I kept my voice neutral, my guard up. She leaned closer, and I caught a whiff of alcohol on her breath. "We should talk later. I have a business proposition for you, something that could be very lucrative for both of us." I made a non-committal sound and moved away as quickly as I could. Whatever Claire was planning, I wanted no part of it. But later that evening, after the reception had ended and I was staying at a small bed and breakfast in town, I received a text from my mother. "Come to the house tomorrow morning. We need to discuss something important. It's about your grandmother's will." I stared at that text for a long time, a knot forming in my stomach. My grandmother had mentioned leaving me something in her will, though I had never asked for details. Whatever it was, I had a feeling Claire had her eyes on it. The next morning, I drove up to the Whitmore mansion with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. My mother met me at the door with an expression I couldn't quite read. She led me into the study, where Richard and Claire were already waiting. There was a lawyer there, too, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who introduced himself as Harold Beck. "Thank you for coming, Miss Harrison," Harold said, gesturing for me to sit. "This shouldn't take long." As it turned out, my grandmother's will was straightforward. She had left small bequests to various family members and charities, but the bulk of her estate, including her house and a substantial savings account totaling just over $400,000, was left to me. Only me. The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel Claire's eyes burning into me, and when I glanced at my mother, I saw something that looked almost like rage flash across her face before she composed herself. "That's very generous of Mother," my mother said, her voice tight. "Sophie, you must be pleased." I wasn't sure what to say. I had expected maybe a few $1,000s, perhaps some of my grandmother's jewelry. This was far more than I had anticipated, and I understood immediately why I had been summoned to this meeting. This wasn't about informing me of my inheritance, this was an ambush. Claire spoke up, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Sophie, I'm so happy for you, but I was wondering if you might consider sharing some of that with the family. After all, Grandmother Eleanor was Mom's mother too, and it seems only fair that… I cut her off. Claire, this was my grandmother's decision. She left very specific instructions in her will, and I intend to honor her wishes. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Richard looked uncomfortable, my mother looked furious, and Claire's mask finally slipped completely. Of course you do, Claire spat. You've always been so self-righteous, haven't you? The poor little victim who clawed her way to success while the rest of us supposedly held you back. Never mind that my father paid for the house you grew up in, the food you ate, the clothes you wore. You owe this family everything, and now you can't even share a windfall that you did nothing to earn. I stood up, my heart pounding. I don't owe this family anything. I worked for everything I have, and this inheritance was left to me by the one person in this family who actually cared about me. I'm not giving you a single cent. I walked out of that house without looking back, my hands shaking with anger and old pain. As I drove away, I saw Claire watching from the window, and the expression on her face sent a chill down my spine. She looked like someone who had just declared war. Over the following weeks, strange things began to happen. At first, they were small, easily dismissed. My credit card was declined at a restaurant, which turned out to be a fraud alert triggered by suspicious activity. Someone had tried to make purchases in my name at stores I had never visited. Then I started receiving calls from debt collectors about accounts I had never opened. Someone was stealing my identity. I spent hours on the phone with banks and credit agencies, trying to untangle the mess. It was exhausting and humiliating, but I managed to get most of it sorted out. I assumed it was random, just bad luck. I didn't connect it to Claire because I didn't want to believe she would go that far. But then the attacks became more targeted. An anonymous email was sent to my company's HR department, accusing me of fabricating my credentials and lying on my resume. The accusations were completely false, but they triggered an internal investigation that consumed weeks of my time and caused me tremendous stress. I was eventually cleared, but the experience left me shaken. Then came the social media campaign. Fake accounts started popping up, posting lies about me, accusing me of things I had never done. They tagged my company, my colleagues, my clients. The posts claimed I was a fraud, a thief, a manipulator. Each accusation echoed the lies Claire had spread about me in high school, and suddenly I knew without a doubt that she was behind all of it. I tried to go to the police, but without concrete proof, there was little they could do. Cyberbullying laws were complicated, and the accounts were created with fake names and untraceable emails. I felt helpless, like I was being systematically dismantled by someone who knew exactly how to hurt me. The final blow came 3 months after my grandmother's funeral. I received a call from my mother, which was unusual because we rarely spoke on the phone. Her voice was cold and businesslike. "Sophie, I need you to come to the house this weekend. There's a family matter we need to discuss." "What kind of family matter?" I asked, my guard immediately up. "Just come," she said. "Saturday at noon." And then she hung up. I debated not going. Every instinct told me to stay away, to protect myself from whatever trap was being set. But something deeper, that foolish hope that every child has for their parents' love, made me get in my car and drive to Millbrook that Saturday. When I arrived, I found my mother, Richard, Claire, and a man I didn't recognize waiting in the living room. The man introduced himself as Arthur Vance, Claire's lawyer. A lawyer. For Claire. I knew immediately that this was going to be bad. My mother spoke first. "Sophie, we've brought you here to discuss a serious matter. Claire has discovered something very troubling about your grandmother's mental state in the months before she died. I felt the blood drain from my face. What are you talking about? Arthur Vance stepped forward, his expression smug. Miss Harrison, we have evidence suggesting that Eleanor Thompson was suffering from significant cognitive decline at the time she amended her will. We also have concerns that you may have exercised undue influence over her during this period, essentially manipulating a vulnerable elderly woman to secure an inheritance that should rightfully have been distributed more equitably among the family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's insane. Grandmother was completely lucid. She knew exactly what she was doing. Claire smiled, and it was the smile of someone who thought they had already won. Really? Because we have medical records that say otherwise. We have witnesses who will testify that she was confused, disoriented, and easily manipulated. And we have evidence that you visited her multiple times in the weeks before she changed her will. What were you doing during those visits, Sophie? Whispering in her ear? Convincing her to cut out her own daughter? I looked at my mother, desperate for her to defend me, to tell Claire to stop this madness. But my mother's face was stone. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, I said, my voice breaking, you can't believe this. You know I would never do something like that. Grandmother loved me. She left me that inheritance because she wanted me to have it. There was no manipulation, no undue influence. This is Claire trying to steal what was left to me. My mother finally looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes made my heart stop. There was no love there, no maternal instinct, just cold calculation. Sophie, she said slowly, I have to consider what's best for the family. Claire has made some very compelling arguments. And frankly, your behavior over the years has raised questions. You've always been difficult, always causing problems. I think it's only fair that we look into this matter properly. I stood there, frozen, as the weight of her words crashed down on me. She wasn't just failing to defend me. She was actively siding with Claire. She was choosing my enemy over me. You're doing this for the money, I whispered. You want a piece of the inheritance, and Claire promised you a cut if you helped her take it from me. My mother's face flickered with something, maybe guilt, maybe shame, but it was gone in an instant. That's a very ugly accusation, Sophie. This is about doing what's right. I laughed, and it was a bitter, broken sound. What's right? You've never cared about what's right. You've only cared about money and status and appearances. You chose Richard over me. You chose Claire over me. And now you're choosing a fabricated lawsuit over your own daughter. What kind of mother does that? My mother's expression hardened. A mother who is tired of your constant need to play the victim. You've always blamed everyone else for your problems. Maybe it's time you faced some consequences. I walked out of that house for what I knew would be the last time. As I drove away, tears streaming down my face, I made myself a promise. I would not let them win. I would not let Claire destroy me, and I would not let my mother get away with this betrayal. Whatever it took, however long it took, I would find a way to expose the truth and make them face the consequences of what they had done. The lawsuit was filed the following month. Claire's attorney argued that my grandmother's will should be invalidated due to her alleged mental incapacity, and that I had manipulated her to secure the inheritance. The medical records they presented were suspicious, clearly fabricated or at least heavily manipulated. Witnesses came forward, claiming that my grandmother had been confused and disoriented, though I had never seen any of these people before in my life. I hired my own attorney, a fierce woman named Rebecca Chen who specialized in probate disputes. She took one look at the case and told me something that gave me hope. This is flimsy, she said. The medical records don't match the timeline, and the witnesses are inconsistent. Someone put this together quickly and carelessly. If we can find the weak points and pull at them, the whole thing will unravel. But weak points weren't enough. I needed proof. I needed to show not just that Claire's case was fabricated, but that she had deliberately created it. I needed to expose her for what she really was. That's when Nina came back into my life in a big way. My oldest friend had become an investigative journalist, and when I told her what was happening, she immediately offered to help. "Claire has been getting away with things for too long," Nina said over coffee one afternoon. "It's time someone held her accountable. Let me dig into this. Let me see what I can find." Over the following months, Nina and I worked tirelessly to build a case against Claire. It wasn't easy. She had covered her tracks well, and my mother's involvement made things even more complicated. But slowly, piece by piece, we began to uncover the truth. The first breakthrough came when Nina tracked down the doctor who had allegedly treated my grandmother for cognitive decline. His name was Dr. Martin Holloway, and he had a reputation in certain circles for being willing to sign off on questionable medical documents for the right price. Nina posed as a potential client, recording their conversation with a hidden microphone. On that recording, Dr. Holloway admitted that he had never actually examined my grandmother. He had been paid to create medical records indicating that she was mentally incompetent, and the person who had paid him was Claire Whitmore. I remember listening to that recording, my hands shaking. It was proof, real proof, that Claire had fabricated evidence. But I knew it wasn't enough. I needed more. The witnesses were the next target. One by one, Nina tracked them down and started asking questions. Most of them refused to talk, but one, a former caretaker named Marge Denton, was clearly uncomfortable with what she had been asked to do. Nina approached her gently, assuring her that she could speak off the record, and slowly, the story came out. Marge had been approached by Claire months before my grandmother died. Claire had offered her $5,000 to testify that my grandmother was confused and easily manipulated. Marge had needed the money, so she agreed, but she had never actually witnessed anything of the sort. My grandmother had been sharp and clear-minded right up until the end. "I feel terrible about it," Marge admitted, tears in her eyes. "That old woman was so kind. And Sophie, she visited all the time, and they would talk and laugh, and it was beautiful. There was nothing sinister about it. But I was desperate, and Claire, she's so convincing. She made me believe I was just helping the family get what they deserved. We had testimony now, we had the doctor, but I wanted more. I wanted to understand why my mother had sided with Claire and whether there was any chance of salvaging our relationship." That question was answered when Nina discovered a series of email exchanges between my mother and Claire. We obtained them through a source I won't name, someone who had access to Richard Whitmore's home network and was willing to help for reasons of their own. The emails were damning. In one exchange, Claire laid out her plan to contest the will. She promised my mother a 50% cut of whatever they recovered, in addition to continued financial support from Richard. My mother's response was enthusiastic. She called it long overdue and said she had always resented how her mother had favored me. She wrote that I had always been difficult and that this was a chance to put Sophie in her place. Reading those words felt like being stabbed in the heart. My own mother, discussing how to betray me, how to steal from me, how to punish me for crimes I had never committed. She didn't love me. Maybe she never had. I was just a prop, an accessory to her social ambitions, and when I became an obstacle, she discarded me without hesitation. The pain was unbearable, but it also clarified things. This wasn't just about money. This was about a lifetime of being undervalued, overlooked, and betrayed by the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally. And now, I had the power to make sure the truth came out. But I knew I had to be smart about this. Claire had money and resources, and my mother was willing to lie for her. If I came at them directly, they would lawyer up and drag things out for years. I needed to think strategically, to plan my moves carefully, and to make sure that when the truth was revealed, there would be no escape. The court case was scheduled to begin in 3 months. That gave me time to prepare. Rebecca and I built our defense meticulously, preparing to present the evidence we had gathered. But I wanted more than just winning the lawsuit. I wanted Claire to face real consequences. I wanted my mother to understand exactly what she had done. I started by documenting everything. Every email, every recording, every piece of evidence was cataloged and backed up in multiple locations. I created a timeline of Claire's campaign against me, starting with the identity theft, moving through the fake social media posts, and culminating in the fraudulent lawsuit. It was a clear pattern of harassment and fraud, and when presented properly, it would be devastating. Then I began reaching out to people from Claire's past. Over the years, she had burned a lot of bridges. Former business partners who had been cheated, ex-boyfriends who had been manipulated, former friends who had been used and discarded. Each of them had a story to tell, and each of them was willing to share it. By the time I was done, I had a comprehensive portrait of who Claire Whitmore really was, a manipulative, deceitful person who had spent her entire life exploiting others for personal gain. The trial began on a cold Tuesday in January. The courtroom was small and intimate, and I sat at the defendant's table with Rebecca by my side. Claire sat across from us, flanked by Arthur Vance and a team of assistants. My mother sat in the gallery behind Claire, her face composed and distant. The first few days were devoted to Claire's case. Arthur Vance presented the fabricated medical records and called the witnesses who had been paid to lie. They told their stories with varying degrees of conviction, some of them clearly uncomfortable with what they were doing. I watched my mother's face during these testimonies, looking for any sign of guilt or hesitation, but she gave nothing away. Then it was our turn. Rebecca began by systematically dismantling the medical evidence. She called expert witnesses who analyzed the records and pointed out inconsistencies that could only be explained by fabrication. She introduced the recording of Dr. Holloway admitting that he had never examined my grandmother, and the courtroom went silent as his voice echoed through the speakers. "I was paid to create those records," Dr. Holloway said on the tape. "I never met the woman. It's not something I'm proud of, but the money was good." Claire's face went pale. Arthur Vance tried to object, claiming the recording was obtained illegally, but Rebecca had anticipated this. She had consulted with experts on recording consent laws and had obtained the recording in a way that made it admissible. The judge allowed it. Next came Marge Denton. She took the stand nervously, avoiding Claire's eyes as she testified about being paid to lie. She described how Claire had approached her, what she had been promised, and how guilty she had felt ever since. Mrs. Thompson was not confused, Marge said, her voice steady despite her obvious anxiety. She was one of the sharpest people I ever met. She knew exactly what she was doing when she changed her will, and she loved Sophie very much. I was wrong to lie about that, and I'm sorry. As Marge spoke, I saw something shift in the courtroom. The observers, the jury, even the judge, they were starting to see Claire for what she really was. The carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. But the moment that truly changed everything came when Rebecca called my mother to the stand. I hadn't expected this. Rebecca had kept this part of her strategy secret, telling me only that she had a surprise that would seal the case. As my mother walked to the witness stand, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation. Part of me didn't want to hear what she would say. Part of me needed to. Rebecca approached her with a calm, steady demeanor. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you describe your relationship with your daughter Sophie?" My mother hesitated, glancing at Claire before answering. "We have a complicated relationship. Sophie has always been difficult. She's resentful of the family, and she's made accusations that have caused a lot of pain." "I see," Rebecca said. "And can you describe your involvement in the lawsuit against Sophie?" "I've supported Claire because I believe she's right. My mother was not in her right mind when she changed the will, and Sophie took advantage of that. Rebecca nodded slowly, then walked to her table and picked up a stack of papers. Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like to enter into evidence a series of emails between you and Claire Whitmore, dated before and after the filing of this lawsuit. My mother's face went white. She looked at Claire, then at Arthur Vance, panic clear in her eyes. Those are private communications. They were obtained legally through discovery, Rebecca said, and they paint a very different picture of your involvement in this case. She began reading the emails aloud. Every damning word, every calculated plan, every expression of resentment toward me. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as my mother's true motivations were exposed. She had conspired with Claire to fabricate evidence, to suborn perjury, and to steal an inheritance that was legally and rightfully mine. When Rebecca finished reading, she looked at my mother with an expression of calm disdain. Mrs. Whitmore, you weren't motivated by concerns about your mother's mental state. You were motivated by greed and resentment. You conspired with Claire Whitmore to commit fraud, and you did so knowing that you were betraying your own daughter. My mother opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, I saw her truly defeated. She had spent decades constructing an image of herself as a respectable, devoted mother and wife. That image was now shattered beyond repair. The judge called a recess, and as my mother left the witness stand, she had to walk past me. For just a moment, our eyes met. I expected to see anger or defiance, but what I saw was worse. There was nothing there. She looked at me like I was a stranger, someone she had never known and never wanted to know. That moment broke something in me, but it also set something free. I had spent my whole life hoping my mother would love me, would choose me, would see me for who I really was. That hope had been a weight around my neck, holding me down and keeping me tethered to people who didn't deserve my loyalty. In that moment, I let it go. The trial continued for another 2 days, but the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence against Claire was overwhelming, and her own witnesses had turned against her. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. The lawsuit was dismissed, and my grandmother's will was upheld. But more than that, the judge referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges against Claire and Dr. Holloway for fraud and perjury. Claire was furious. As the verdict was announced, she stood up and screamed accusations at me, calling me a liar and a thief and worse. Security had to restrain her, and the image of her being dragged from the courtroom, wild-eyed and raving, was captured by every camera in the room. By that evening, it was all over the local news. Claire Whitmore, daughter of prominent businessman Richard Whitmore, had been caught committing fraud and was facing criminal charges. Richard, to his credit, finally saw his daughter for what she was. He had been oblivious for years, too wrapped up in his own life to notice the damage Claire was doing. But the trial had opened his eyes. In the weeks that followed, he quietly divorced my mother, citing irreconcilable differences. She received a modest settlement, far less than she had hoped for, and was forced to leave the colonial mansion she had coveted for so long. As for Claire, the criminal investigation took its course. She was eventually charged with fraud, conspiracy, and perjury. Dr. Holloway cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing detailed testimony about how Claire had paid him to fabricate the medical records. The witnesses who had lied on her behalf came forward as well, eager to avoid their own legal troubles. The trial was brief and decisive. Claire was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 3 years in prison. I watched from the gallery as the verdict was read, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. This was justice, but it had come at a terrible cost. I had lost my mother, truly lost her, in a way that could never be repaired. But I had also gained something. I had proven to myself and to the world that I was not the person they had tried to make me. I was not a victim. I was not a thief or a liar or a manipulator. I was Sophie Harrison, and I had built my life on my own terms. No one could take that from me. In the aftermath of the trial, I took some time to heal. I used part of my grandmother's inheritance to take a leave of absence from work and travel. I visited places I had always dreamed of seeing, from the mountains of Switzerland to the beaches of Thailand. I spent time with Nina, who had been there for me through everything, and I learned to let go of the anger and pain that had consumed me for so long. I also wrote a letter to my mother. I never sent it, but writing it was part of my healing process. In that letter, I said everything I had ever wanted to say. I told her about the pain she had caused me, the ways she had failed me, and the impact of her betrayal. But I also told her that I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. Holding on to that anger was only hurting me, and I refused to let her have that power over me anymore. The last time I saw my mother was about 6 months after the trial. I was in Millbrook to visit my grandmother's grave, something I did every year on her birthday. As I was leaving the cemetery, I saw a woman walking toward me on the path. It took me a moment to recognize her. She had aged dramatically, her face lined and weary, her posture stooped. She looked like a shadow of the woman she had been. We stopped a few feet apart, neither of us speaking. The silence stretched on, heavy with everything that had passed between us. Finally, she spoke. "Sophie," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. I don't know what I wanted. I looked at her, this woman who had given me life and then spent years making that life miserable. I felt pity, but also a profound sense of closure. "Goodbye, Mom," I said, and I walked away. I haven't seen her since. From what I've heard, she's living in a small apartment somewhere in Boston, alone and largely forgotten by the social circles she once coveted. Richard has moved on with his life, Claire is serving her sentence, and the colonial mansion has been sold. The world that my mother sacrificed me for has crumbled completely. As for me, I'm doing well. Better than well, actually. I've returned to work, been promoted, and recently started my own consulting firm. I've built a life filled with people who love and support me, people I've chosen rather than been stuck with by accident of birth. Nina and I are closer than ever, and I've made new friends who know my story and respect me for surviving it. I still think about what happened, of course. Some wounds never fully heal, and the betrayal of a parent leaves scars that last a lifetime. But I've learned something important through all of this. Family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who show up for you when things get hard, the people who believe in you when the world is against you, the people who choose you as deliberately as you choose them. My grandmother understood that. She saw the truth of my situation long before I did, and she tried to give me a foundation to build on. Her inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about faith, about believing that I was worthy of something good. That faith sustained me through the darkest parts of this journey, and it continues to sustain me now. To anyone out there who has been betrayed by someone they trusted, I want you to know that you are not alone. Betrayal is devastating, but it is not the end of your story. You have the power to rebuild, to find people who truly value you, and to create a life that reflects your own worth. It won't be easy, and there will be times when you feel like giving up. But if you keep going, if you hold on to your sense of self and your determination to survive, you will come out the other side stronger than you ever imagined. The day my mother chose my enemy over me was the worst day of my life. But it was also the day I finally understood that I deserved better. And in the end, that understanding was worth more than any inheritance. I am Sophie Harrison. I was betrayed by my own mother, and I survived. This is my story, and now you know the truth.